Okay. Well, people are still filtering into the room, but I believe it's time we should start to get the session underway. So I'm going to say welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us today. This is the latest in a series of talks that broadcasts are giving during the lockdown period on crucial topics in the TV industry. The idea behind these masterclasses is to keep the industry connected during lockdown, keep people talking, spread some best practice across the industry as we hear from some of the industry's top producers. As we near 100 participants, I am going to just give you a bit of background on what's happening here. My name is Jesse Whittock. I am the Insight Editor at Broadcast Magazine, and I'll be your host today. And before I get on to introducing the panel, there's just a bit of housekeeping that I have to go through. We're now recording live, so you guys are all seeing this live and exclusive. This recording will be made live on the Broadcast Now website probably sometime next week. We're probably looking at Friday, which gives you guys an exclusive window into the minds of our panelists today. Now, if you have any questions for the panel, you can deliver those. I know some of you already have sent me questions prior to the panel, and thank you for that. But you can also send questions via the Q&A function on Zoom. And Max Goldbart, who is technically a panelist, although you won't see him, he has his screen blacked out. My colleague will be filtering through those questions and he'll be sending them through to me, and I'll get through as many of those as I possibly can, time permitting, of course. But we'll look to get through as many of those as we can. Okay, and we do expect a reasonably high volume, so please accept my apologies now if I don't read it out. I'm doing my best. You can send abuse to me after the session, direct to my email if you like. Okay, on to the panel. So we've got a great panel for you today. All really experienced pitchers. I've been working in the industry for many years combined. First up, we have Melanie Leach, who is the Joint Managing Director of South Shore Productions, which she runs together with Andrew Mackenzie. Together, Melanie and Andrew previously ran the 2-4 group. They were behind major hits such as This Time Next Year, The Jump, Real Marigold Hotel, and they launched their own company, South Shore, last year, 2019. During the lockdown, the company has successfully developed, pitched and produced Home Alone with Joel Dommett, which is on ITV2. So welcome, Melanie. Next up, we have Ian Wimbush from Rumpus Media. Ian created Rumpus with Emily Hudd in 2013. The company has gone on to become a factual entertainment specialist and counts shows such as The Misadventures of Ramesh Ranganathan, Joel Lycett's Got Your Back, or Hugo Boss has got your back, depending on what Joe is calling himself at the time, and Joel and Nish versus the World. So welcome, Ian. Thank you for joining us. Next up, we have Darren Lurid. Darren Lurid is Creative Director of Woodcut Media. Darren has been a commissioner for London Live. He's worked as head of programming for the BBC's Global iPlayer service, and now he works on creating factual programs for the UK and international markets. Woodcut have created shows such as Discovery's Idris Elba, Mandela, My Dad and Me, and several crime series for the likes of Sky, Crime and Investigation, and Netflix. So thank you for joining us. And lastly, by no means least, we have Kieran Doherty from Belfast Stellify Media. Kieran runs Stellify with Matthew Worthy, and together they've landed commissions such as ITV's reboots of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and Blind Date, and last year's Flinch, which was for Netflix. So, as you can see, a really strong panelist group today. Let's crack straight on with the questions. Now, this is going to be a question that I'm going to ask Mel to answer first, but I think it'll be a question for the entire panel. and that is, if you cast your mind back to the 23rd of March, lockdown had just been announced. The TV production world sort of went into a spiral that no one had faced before. It was a new set of challenges. What was your initial reaction to what you would do in terms of shows and in terms of how you would pitch programs over that initial period? Was there an initial strategy, or was it a trial and error process for you?
I think we did initially respond. We were quite reactive at the beginning, to be honest. I think we immediately started to think about what can we produce under lockdown that is going to kind of fulfill a need in the broadcaster. And we gravitated fairly quickly towards comedy, because we just felt that was going to be a place that people would want to inhabit through a time that was going to be difficult. And so I think because of that, we sort of concentrated on talking to talent and figuring out kind of what could we offer in the comedy ent space that could be turned around under those conditions. And that was what led to us ending up making Home Alone with Joel Dommett. Once that was sort of underway, I think we became a bit less reactive, to be honest. I mean, I can't underestimate how brilliant it was to actually have something in production quite early into lockdown, because I think lockdown was a big mental shock for everybody. And I think I personally might have gone slightly mad if we'd just gone into sort of 3 months of pure development. And so the learning curve of, like, how do you make a show under lockdown, and how do you work remotely with teams, and how do you do Zoom editing, and all of those things that came as a sort of learning of that show were quite a welcome distraction from the fact that we weren't all together in the office. But once that was up and underway, honestly, we became quite a lot less reactive, and we just sort of reverted to doing development the way we've always done it, which is this a good idea? Do we love it enough to try and persuade somebody else to love it with us?
Okay. Let's ask the same question to Darren. So Darren, you guys produce various formats in the factual space, and the roster of people that you pitch to is quite wide, as you have both UK and international focuses. What was your initial thoughts when it came to pitching in terms of lockdown? Did you think we just need to go deeply into development now, or was there a sense of we need to get a handle on what commissioners are going to want in the next whatever period it turned out to be?
I guess we figured that everyone was trying to work it out for themselves at the same time. Like, none of us really anticipated that we'd be in this particular situation. So it was just trying to work out what could help, and what would be easy for us to do. And we've got in-house post-production facilities, so we knew that we could be editing remotely. We had a few shows in production which we were delivering remotely as well. So we knew that if we came up with an idea, that we'd be able to do the end bit. And so then we thought, okay, what about the front bit? Well, the front bit, because a lot of our shows have archive and talking heads, we thought, well, there might be a way that we could be looking at that. And then we thought, should we be doing mainly archive-based shows? Because we do a lot of history, a lot of crime shows, and we've got our own deep archive as well. So in the first instance, it was like, what could we give broadcasters really quickly that might work for them? But I think, from my perspective, I think maybe that kind of stuff was pitched slightly too early. In terms of the genre of programs, in terms of the crime and history space, because I think a lot of stuff that ended up being commissioned was very much real time. It was quite light, as Melanie was saying. It was more uplifting, and I think people also trying to work out what it is that they wanted and for how long they would want a particular kind of thing for. So then what we started to do is we started to chat to all the people that we would usually speak to, but probably a broader spread. So for those that don't know, like we do talk to broadcasters in the UK, we talk to broadcasters in America, we talk to broadcasters in Europe, but we also talk to distributors, we also talk to private equity. So we were having quite wide-ranging conversations and trying to piece together who was willing or looking to spend money in particular spaces, and whether what they wanted to spend their money on had changed and in what way that had changed. And I guess that's been an ongoing process for us. And I think what has encouraged people is the fact that we have been delivering shows through this period and are continuing to do so, because then it gives them confidence that whatever it is that you're pitching, that you are actually going to be able to give them a finished product during these times.
Okay. Kieran, what was the initial reaction from entertainment commissioners? What did they immediately pivot to?
I don't think they pivoted to anything. I mean, it was everybody went into a weird kind of free fall trying to figure out what to do next. And we thought, really foolishly, we thought this is it. This is our big chance. You know, drama's going to go, sport's going to go. A lot of things aren't going to make it out. We could really have some great ideas, pitch them, make them right now, become billionaires, buy some yachts. That was the big plan. And so we threw ourselves into development really quickly. What can we make right now? Let's get it done. And then sort of very quickly realized that everything we were coming up with was rubbish. Like, it was properly, you'd only commission it because of COVID. You would never have got it on the air ordinarily. So we moved away from that pretty quick and decided the only pitch shows to try and have good ideas, and then we'd worry about if we could make them during COVID or not, and if we couldn't, then at least we'd be ready for when COVID sort of hopefully peters out a bit. And that became our strategy, which was, you know, initially stupidly having ideas for the wrong reasons, and then, you know, getting ourselves back in the game somewhat. But in terms of the commissioners, I think they were looking to fill gaps with stuff that could make it there, stuff that, like archive shows, you could turn around pretty quick, which we don't have anything else, so we couldn't repackage anything really. So we were kind of out on our own trying to solve problems, I guess, like everybody else. You know, we were.
So it was much more of a sort of development step for you guys, and then which obviously you pushed into quickly, which we'll talk about more a bit later. But Ian, sort of coming from a similar sort of fact space, what were your initial conversations with commissioners? What was the shape of those conversations?
Well, we were in the fortunate position, I guess. You know, I always think that the easiest way to pitch is sort of when you're in production with commissioners that you like, so you're already having regular conversations with those people. So we were still in production with our Joe Lycett series, so we were talking to the formats and features department sort of on a daily basis. So we were hearing how they were reacting to the situation and what they were losing, and attempting to pitch into them primarily, actually. I mean, we went broader than that, but because we're having those discussions, I mean, I just think it is those informal conversations which can often yield success. In that instance, it didn't, but actually, so we adopted the same approach as the one that Mel is talking about, but less successfully, and pitched basically the same show as South Shore made, but it wasn't as good. And I would say I really enjoyed the Joel show. I thought that it was just one of, you know, it was easily the best, in my opinion, of the lockdown COVID productions. But anyway, we pitched in those type of shows. Simultaneously, we slightly put our head in the sand about our various travel series, thinking that they'll definitely still go ahead. And slowly but surely, as they were paused one after another, it wasn't slowly but surely, it was quite swiftly, we had to start rethinking. And I think Channel 4 certainly were pitched up relatively quickly, I think, in terms of their lockdown academy and that kind of output, which we kind of ruled ourselves out of, having sort of frantically generated some ideas there. And then, like I think everyone else is saying, we kind of looked to the future and how we would deal with what we had, really. Okay.
Yeah, Mel, let's talk a little bit about the At Home with Joel Dommett commission. That was one of the early moves that broadcasters made, one of the first commissions in lockdown. For those who are with us today who don't know what that show is, can you give us a bit of an outline of what it was and how you proposed that show to ITV?
Sure. So it was, we put a rig into Joel's house. Joel lives with his wife Hannah, and luckily for us, they have a really beautiful house that is almost like a set. So they had like 3 or 4 great areas that we knew were going to look good on camera. And the show was quite straightforward, really. It was built around a series of comedy strands. So there was always an interview with Joel where he would interview another celebrity on Zoom in the bath. There was always a punter item where we would hijack somebody's Zoom call and take over, all basically comedy-driven items that we return to every week. And we pitched it very simply, really. I think everyone remembers at the beginning, there was just this mass sort of release of virals, and some of them were really, really funny. And we literally just pulled a few of them together and said, look, this is going to be a funny comedy world. We don't want to rely on the virals, but the virals are the sort of inspiration. How can we use them to motivate a comedy end show with Joel? And we sort of pinned the whole thing around him in the end, because he was the talent that ITV wanted to work with. And he's an amazingly collaborative, and he's a very good producer in his own right, John. So he and his writers also kind of brought a lot to the idea from day one. And he was very generous in as much as, in terms of his actual time on the production, he gave so much, not only did he give us his house and access to his wife and everything, but anyone who's made a lockdown show will know it does take about 5 times longer than a normal show. And so, every single day, he would be on camera. We would do quite long records. He was having to do a lot of the technical work and a lot of the work himself, and he never shied away from that. So we were very lucky, I think, in that we ended up kind of in production with a talent who really embraced the sort of constraints of the situation.
Great. Let's move the conversation on to the actual process of a pitch. Now, everyone has their own style of and their own relationships with commissioners and ways of selling their shows. But I might start with Darren. What have you found commissioners asking for different materials or any sorts of different or new digital materials or whatever it might be when you're having conversations about shows that either could be produced in the short term or shows that might be produced as we sort of move towards a post-COVID environment?
I think one of the things that strikes me, it's happening a little bit less now, but definitely at the start, the conversations with commissioners were just slightly different because of the situation that you're in. So you naturally just sort of talk about what was going on in your lives, and then you might move into the commissioning, and then you might go back to talking about what was going on in your lives. And in that way, then, I guess, a lot of the conversations I've been having, you almost felt like you were closer to the commissioners during lockdown than you were when you were normally pitching, because you had this sort of unified experience. I also think that because everyone is desperately trying to work out what's the right thing to do, no one has as much time to obfuscate. So you can be a little bit more direct, I think. And I'm finding that people are being a little bit more direct in terms of what it is that they need. In terms of materials, I don't think that's really changed. And it's kind of dictated by the relation that you have with people. Some people, you can just drop a one-liner into a conversation or a title and see how they feel about it. Other people, you might come with a sizzle and just hope that it doesn't buffer as it's playing via Zoom and you share the screen. And other people, you have a chat and you send the materials afterwards. So that element hasn't changed. But I do think, I think maybe the length of conversations I'm having is slightly longer as well. And I think that's always useful, because the more you talk to people, the more you gather what might be useful. But yeah, those have been the things for me.
Okay, Ian, same question.
I mean, I'd reiterate what Darren said. Absolutely. I think psychologically, it was really important to stay close to the people in the TV community that you get on well with, and obviously some of those people are commissioners, and they were the conversations which actually had a resonance beyond pitching. Actually, I think again, like Mel said, it's really nice. It was really good to feel like you were still working, but it was also good to connect with people genuinely on a level that you hadn't perhaps done before, because we were in an extraordinary situation. So ultimately, I guess it's good for business. Everything that Darren's saying, I totally agree with. But I think it's partly good for business because it it's genuine. You know, you just wanted to talk to people, you know, and out of those conversations, I think talking about how you're feeling, talking about the state of the nation and the world, ideas actually spring out of those conversations, which you don't always have when you know, in Channel 4 for half an hour or ITV for an hour, you know. So that would be, I'd share Darren's thoughts.
Okay. Mel, I know you mentioned that you thought the importance of the deck has really increased under lockdown conditions.
Yeah, I mean, I think my experience has been slightly different to Darren's, if I'm honest, in that I found that our pitches have been quite a lot shorter, and that it's quite easy now to just drop into somebody for a 15-minute Zoom and say, look, we've had this thought, we've done 6 slides, can we just walk you through it, and not feel like we have to take up a whole hour of their day. And I think that's made pitching quite a lot more efficient and slightly less taxing for everybody concerned, really. So in terms of like the materials, I think we have, I don't know if we've really massively changed them, but I think you are always mindful now of the fact that if you're going to pitch this over a digital platform, you know, lots of words and a complicated deck are probably not going to go down as well as if you're in the room going through that with them. And so we've probably just slightly modified the way that we present the ideas to make them feel simple, visual, and quite easy to understand over Zoom or Skype or whatever.
Okay. Kieran, how have you found the overall experience of pitching? Is it sort of frustrating, or has it been liberating? What's been your overall sense of the process?
It's been brilliant for us, actually, because we're remote anyway. So the amount of time we've spent talking to commissioners has gone up by, you know, a factor of 10. So previously we'd have had to fly in, you'd have tried to squeeze as many meetings in as you could to make it efficient in terms of your time in London, or wherever you were going. And then you'd be, you know, like the guys are saying, you get stuck in a room in Channel 4 or ITV, 15 minutes of your meeting is just getting into the room. Then it's, you know, water, tea, coffee, whatever. And then there's 10 minutes small talk, trying to get it done, and then you're at the door. So the efficiencies of being able to pitch over Zoom are great, but also the amount of time we spent with commissioners it's been really good for us. And also, we don't really get the opportunity to socialize with commissioners quite a bit because we're not in the local areas that we're not in London unless we're there for something specific, in which case it's a party and it's great. So being able to see where people live, and, you know, I haven't had a single pitch where somebody's kid hasn't come in and they've gone, oh, look, here's my one. And I've gone, oh, here's my one there. Look, I mean, I'm sitting here with this because my kid came in and attacked me. And now I was like, well, I'm keeping this now. So even just doing that's quite nice. And being able to see the back, we spend, as Darren was saying, the opening 5 minutes of all the original pitch calls were like, oh, I've got that book. Yeah, I like that, because you can see the background. And so you just, I think it's brought everybody together a bit closer. And then, Diago, what Mel's saying, our pitches, you know, we will get on for a Zoom. You'll pitch for however many minutes. You get your very quick no, which is fantastic. And then if that was a meeting, we'd have had that no would have been dragged out for half an hour to make it feel like we didn't waste a flight on EasyJet. Where now it's like, I don't want that. We're like, well, let's go back to day drinking. We'll talk later. And then we leave. So everything's much more efficient, much more quick. And everybody seems happy to say no quicker, which is fantastic. So it's been really, really good. Long may it continue for us anyway.
Do you expect it to continue in the sort of format that's developed post lockdown, as we come out of lockdown? And we're probably some way off people, you know, taking regular flights and regular trains. But when we get back to that situation, do you expect it to be a bit more of a sort of mixed ecology in terms of pitching and communication, or do you think we'll go back to the status quo?
I think we'll go back to the status quo. I don't think you could, you know, responsibly let it go back to the status quo. You know, everybody's trying to be carbon neutral is part of it, but also just the expense that it puts on you as a company to try and make it into the room for the pitch. I think it will be a mixture of things, but for the most part, you know, everybody's always complaining about access to commissioners. Who gets the access? How does the access work and everything else? And this has been a great sort of level of a playing field. And then, whereas previously I was remote, we're all remote now, which is the thing. So no one's bumping into anybody in a corridor or over a pint or all those things that maybe happens. I don't know what does. So I think pushing beyond that, and I think the commissioners have found it, certainly everybody we've spoken to has found it great, because their days aren't racked. you know, trying to drag out a long no, or, you know, trying to find a room, and everything's just happening better. So I think it'll be a mixture of both, but I would say certainly for us, we're going to fight to try and keep this, because it's massive, makes massive savings to our finances, but also it's quicker and it's more efficient, and we're having much more success at this than we would having an idea, trying to get into someone's diary, waiting 3 weeks, flying in, hearing that's not quite right, flying back home, making some changes, trying to get backwards and forwards. So, you know, it seems like a smarter way of working. Why would you go back if
definitely makes sense? Darren, I wonder if how what you guys think about it. I know that Woodcut is based in Eastleigh, so you're not a London indie, although you have both working in London. But how's that experience been for your company?
Well, yeah, we've got a base in Eastleigh, and we have a base in London, and so we've always encouraged remote working, but I don't really think we did it as efficiently as we do now. Like, all the execs would have catch-ups, and we'd all get on the train down to Eastleigh, and then every now and again we'd all try and meet up in London. But actually, I'm probably having more interactions with the execs in my own company now, more via Zoom than I was before. And I guess with the trips, you know, I guess you have to pick your battles now in future as to like how important is it that we travel. So we were gonna have a business trip to Munich, and this was in early March. And at this point, I think Munich had 37 deaths, which is about the same as the UK had. And we made the decision not to go. And right at the last minute, we made the decision not to go. So we had to email all of the broadcasters and other people we were trying to speak to and say, is it okay if we just do video calls? And we'd never used Zoom before. This was about 2 weeks before everyone was really locked down. And that was a really good experience, because we actually realized that actually people were receptive to it, that you could have meaningful conversations. And so I think it'll be a mixed ecology for us. I think to a certain degree, we will try and have more conversations with people, particularly internationally, with a lot of the people that we deal with more regularly, and pick our battles in terms of where else we might go. The other thing I think is just really, it seems really odd to me now, is how long I would spend on phone conference calls where like everyone would talk over one another, and it just wasn't a very pleasurable experience, but we somehow just sort of tolerated it. And I wouldn't want to go back to that either, I don't think.
Ian, I wonder what you think about, as a London indie, hearing what Kieran said about the sort of the democratization almost of access, which is something that various sources at broadcast have been talking to us about over the last few weeks. Do you see that as a sort of heightened competition, or do you think in terms of the overall health of the industry that kind of widened access to commissioners is a good thing?
It's definitely a good thing. I mean, inevitably there's going to be competition, but you know, it's so important to have different voices in every sphere, you know. So I sort of, you know, it is obviously going to be increased competition. And I think that it's really important and really good. And I also think that the even for us, you know, going to a broadcaster is it's an hour and a half of travel out of a day, you know. And I've found huge efficiencies in just, I know it's quite dull in a way, but just sitting in one place. And there's lots of things that I miss about it, but sitting at my desk at home, just, you know, relentlessly either talking to people or working up the ideas, it's cut out a lot of the chaff of the working life. Having said which, there's lots that I miss about that as well. Like, I mean, and it's sort of the incidental interactions that you have, some of which can be really important in terms of ideas and stuff, but other interactions which are just like, you need human contact. So I think that Zooms will continue, and I would say it would be much more preferable to have in production as well, to have commissioner meetings about scripts and stuff like this, because on production it just ruins the momentum of a day, that when you have to go to the channel and kind of go through a script, when you could do it exactly like this. I just see no hesitation in that, but it is really nice, and maybe it will become more of a luxury to have proper face-to-face interaction.
Okay. Just at this stage, I'd like to remind all the attendees, if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A box, and we will get through them. As of right now, I'm going to continue with my own questions, but please do. We're very happy to ask the panelists those questions for you. Now, here is a question I'm going to first ask Kieran about, and then I'll open it out to the rest of the group. One of the immediate or relatively immediate impacts of lockdown was the pressure on the advertising budgets at the commercial broadcasters. That immediately led to budgets being reduced. Channel 4 were very open about how their budgets would have to reduce for the rest of the year. Yet commissioning levels, whilst falling, the data that we have has been relatively consistent amongst most of the broadcasters. They have been commissioning at a reasonable rate. Now, Kieran, you got a commission for one of the most talked about shows of the lockdown, Snoop Dogg's.
Yep.
First of all, could you tell us a little bit about that program? I'd love to know what happened in that pitch. And then if you could just talk a bit around the budgets, because it's fair to say that show is going to be produced at a reduced budget from what you would expect a show like that to be created for. So if you could take us through that process.
Yeah, the show itself came out of Channel 4 had put out a call to say celebs are all trapped indoors. What can we do with them? As mad as it sounds, we had been in strapping cameras to dogs space for a while, which sounds insane. And we'd been chatting a little bit about doing things like that. All the celebs have dogs, so on and so forth. And then we have regular routines with commissioners now via Zoom, which is another great side effect of all this for us. And one of them was with Sean. We've been pitching Sean different bits and pieces. What about the celebs' dogs? Things like that. Our version of it was really complex and a bit, out there. And Sean, in typical Sean, everyone knows him, I'm sure. Typical Sean fashion, was very direct. Strap cameras to their dogs, make a proper show, bring me something back, cheerio, and that was it. So we were like, oh, okay. So we pretended it was all on us, but in actual fact, Sean cut through the nonsense for us. And then we had to create a piece of tape, which we did. We don't really ever pitch paper. I don't think we ever pitch paper. We'll pitch a poster, or it'll be a sizzle. It'll either be self-shot, or it'll be a Franken edit from stuff we've just gathered from the internet, whatever. So we just created a sizzle of all these little dogs at home doing stupid things. And pitched it in with a kind of like a PowerPoint, which sounds like PowerPoint sounds terrible, but our development team, you should see what they can do with that stuff. It's amazing. And so they did this little PowerPoint about how the format would work and everything else. And it was commissioned like really, really quickly. And as it got commissioned, we just kept going, we're putting cameras on dogs. I mean, it's just cameras on dogs. So it got picked up, and that was just away. And then we had to cast it and everything else. And the budgets are definitely reduced. So it is more of a challenge. The channel know that, and they're working with us, and it's great. And as much as they're down, we sort of have, I think, we have a bit of a head start on all this, because the budgets, while low by comparison for what Channel 4 would usually be, are quite similar to the budgets we would get if we wanted to make something for BBC Northern Ireland, or even RTE for a half an hour. So we've got lots of people based back here in Belfast and Ireland as a whole who are used to working at those tariffs and making that sort of stuff work. And a lot of the people who are working on the show are actually based here. So we've been able to make the money work for ourselves and to turn it around. But we're definitely working on smaller budgets, there's no doubt. And then to make it during COVID, sort of echo what Mel was saying, is everything takes longer. So you have to factor that in. But it's, it became very much about it always is, but massively planning everything out well in advance, getting everything agreed in advance with Sean and the channel, making sure we knew exactly where we were, and then press and go and kind of just going for a run at it essentially. So
great. Well, I think we're all looking forward to seeing what the dogs manage to pick up on those cameras.
yeah.
Mel, can you? What's been your impression in terms of budgets and those discussions? Have you found it surprising what the commissioners have said, or do you think they've been sensible? And what's your read?
Necessarily surprising. I mean, I think all the channels have been affected differently by this, which is sort of to be expected because they're all sitting on slightly different business models. And so, you know, the BBC obviously has a guaranteed income in a way that ITV and Channel 4 and, you know, Channel 5 don't. Equally, you know, Channel 4 is possibly the most exposed because it also doesn't have an in-house production arm and it carries quite a lot less stock than some of the other channels. And so I think you would expect the channels to react kind of differently to this situation because they're different businesses and they operate in different ways. And so, yeah, some of the, I mean, obviously there are challenges around some of the Channel 4 budgets, but I also think they're being quite creative about how to approach those. And, you know, they're very good on partnerships at Channel 4. They're good at identifying, you know, how they could bring additional funding to things, and they work really closely with producers to do that. You know, the BBC have got their own problems with the over 75 licence fees. It's not like they're immune from COVID just because, you know, they're licence fee funded. So absolutely there are challenges, but by and large, I think we found that, you know, when there's a good idea and people love it, they'll still find the money to pay for it.
Okay, great. That's good news. I've got a couple of questions from the floor at this stage. So I'm going to, we'll start with Ian. When you're developing or pitching shows at the moment, are you going in with specific plans around the social distancing and other measures that have you know, arisen during lockdown? Or is that something that you consider more as the job of the broadcaster to have those guidelines ready for you guys to work within?
So we're currently making a lockdown show, which was pitched, which is it's a kind of a catch up on our Ramesh Misadventures series, and we pitched that with COVID and social distancing in mind. The big thing is that we're not pitching lots of travel anymore, which is our mainstay in some ways in terms of what we make. So that's just simply something that we're not doing right now. So that's the genre gone. But and in terms of we've got a couple of studio shows which we've got at an interesting point in development and quite an advanced point, and we had to think creatively about how a lack of an audience would affect the atmosphere and the final result of the final product in terms of the comedians telling jokes. And I think that I'm not sure how, I don't think necessarily that commissioners are, I think largely, and I think rightly, they're assuming that they can achieve the same output in some ways, certainly thinking sort of in the final quarter of the year and next year, which is I think where most people are now pitching into. I could be wrong about that. Certainly that's where we're pitching into, that will be at a point where the social distancing distances have been reduced to 1 meter, maybe even less, and so we can proceed. But yeah, no, it has been, it's definitely a consideration in that sort of latter stages of the pitch. How do you deal with social distancing? But I don't think any of our ideas that we've pitched have been predicated on that, or success or failure has been achieved through that.
Fair. Darren, I'm going to ask you the next question from the floor. Do you think that the kinds of ideas that you've been pitching over the last couple of months will significantly change as we come out of lockdown? Is it what will there be conversations that you'll want to sort of end or move on or adapt if and when you feel comfortable that production is sort of back to a much more regular state?
I guess to kind of build on what Ian was saying, in some cases there are just genres of programs that you would normally have focused on that don't feel like they're viable at the moment. And you've got one of two choices, right? You can either like just panic and think, oh my God, that's our business done. Or you go, okay, well, what else can we develop? Who else should we be speaking to? What other ideas should we be coming up with? And I think what we've found is, like, and also what's come up is like talking to people that you get on with, and whether that's commissioners, but also in our case, it's other producers. So we've actually been chatting to other companies and thinking, are there ideas that we can work on together? Do you maybe have a specialism that we don't have? Are there ways in which we can leverage our relationships to create something slightly different? So what I would say is that I definitely feel like we're developing in a wider range of factual places and factual formats, and that's leading us into different types of conversations. And in a way, I wouldn't want that to stop post-COVID, because it just creates more opportunities for us.
And one of those shows you've been working on, Darren, I think it's quite an interesting case study, is Secret History of World War II. Can you sort of talk around how that project's come about and the partners who are involved in it?
Yeah. So I guess it started with a trip to Paris, because why not? No, look, we do a lot of international co-productions, and we thought, wouldn't it be a good idea for us to have a more direct relationship with shows that are being pre-sold on our behalf by distributors? And we had a meeting with one particular broadcaster called Histoire, and at the end of the meeting they said, oh, okay, so we'll see you at Sunnyside then. And we said, yeah, we'll see you at Sunnyside. And at that point we had absolutely no intention of going to Sunnyside. Generally, and I left the meeting and I looked at my boss and I said, I'm going to Sunnyside, aren't I? She said, yeah. I said, right, fine. So we get to Sunnyside, and then we mentioned this idea that we just developed called the Secret History of World War II. And they were quite interested in it, but obviously because they tend to pre-buy shows from, or the types of shows that we make, they tend to pre-buy, they could only offer us a finite amount of money, maybe like 15, 20% of the budget. But we knew that was a catalyst for us to be able to continue that conversation with other people. And like I said, we always tend to talk to broadcasters and distributors in tandem. So we started to speak to distributors about it. Once they knew that Histoire were on board, various distributors made various offers. And in the end, we went with one with Red Arrow. And then because of this particular strategy that we have, we end up chatting to the commissioning side and the acquisition side at the same time. And so we went in to see Channel 5 and we spoke to commissioner, and then he said, oh, actually you should speak to Cherry on the acquisition side. And we're like, cool, because we speak to Cherry all the time anyway. And we went and spoke to Cherry, and Cherry said, well, I can give you about 40% of the budget if you can get the rest to be pieced up. And that's how that came about. And then we're now in the process of delivering the final episodes of that to Channel 5 at the moment. And like almost a year to the day that we pitched it, my boss is doing a sort of masterclass on the show at a virtual Sunnyside this time.
So like a virtuous circle.
Yes.
Kieran, I wonder if you feel like you're speaking to more commissioners than you were before. I mean, you said the access has increased quite significantly, but do you feel like the actual pool of people that you're speaking to has grown, or is it more access to the people that are more relevant to your business directly?
It's probably just we're talking to the people we speak to more, because we pitch right across all the broadcasters and we pitch internationally as well. So whereas the international pitches are so few and far between because you're so far away, it'd be the occasional phone call or you're not part of that pitch beyond a certain point. Now with Zoom, we've been pitching Celebrity Snoop Dogg's in the States, which has been, I would have preferred to go to the States to do it, if I'm brutally honest, but being trapped in this room is the next best thing. So we're doing that, which is great. And we're seeing more of those people than we would have ordinarily. And then we would have had routines in with the commissioners that we speak to by phone, which is always annoying. And it's just one of the reasons why we just assumed we could never work like this properly is because of, group phone calls, which is just insanely annoying. These aren't as bad, 12 weeks of them, it's probably a bit much, but this is infinitely preferable. So we have regular catch-ups with all the commissioners that pitch to across all the channels. And yeah, for us, it's never a nice thing to say. For us, COVID's been really good for our business because we've got all this stuff, but it's been good for us, essentially, I guess.
Mel, what do you think? Have you tried to speak to commissioners that you might not have before, or was it still the case that the set of commissioners that you tend to work with are the ones who are the most important throughout this period?
I mean, I think maybe we've widened our pool slightly because projects have been handed on to people who we may not necessarily have known because they're built around a talent and they're, more suited to that person. And so yeah, we have met some new people through the course of this. But largely, I would say we focused on the sort of key people who we usually develop and pitch for. So I don't think there's been a massive change from us in that respect. I think the more difficult thing, and I think it's brilliant, Kieran, that you've found this has been a good thing. I think it was certainly at the very beginning for us not a good thing. We set up a brand new indie that was 4 months into its life when we went into a massive pandemic, and it was quite a shock. And a lot of the things that we thought we were going to be making were either paused or cancelled. And so you do go through a sort of grieving process. There's nothing worse than having something commissioned and then losing it. That's kind of quite heartbreaking. And you have to pick yourself up and dust yourself off from that. I think we've come out of that now, obviously, and we can feel that the market's starting to recover, and there are much more longer term plans coming through, and we're being able to pitch things now with greater confidence that we're going to be able to actually make them. But I still think there are big challenges around creativity and producing in this way. I think it's definitely more efficient, but I don't know that it's half as much fun, and I'm not sure that it's as easy to be creative on a Zoom as it is when you've got people in an office. So, I'm in an office now. We've come back into our office this week. Just a few people from development. We're going to keep production out, but we're trying to get together for some brainstorms, because I think it's really, really hard if you don't ever see each other face to face to capture the sort of creativity that sits around the edges of the conversation.
I suppose an extension of that is a conversation around scale as well. When you were at 2-4, Mel, there was a lot of your shows were really big, ambitious shows, things like The Jump, which took a lot of planning, a lot of people, just lots of different elements moving. Have commissioners asked for, in any way, ideas of sort of scale but scaled back, or are they on a completely different track at the moment, would you say?
I don't think they are on a completely different track. I think all of the channels still want really big, bold and ambitious ideas, and we've got to work in a different way and work more closely with their health and safety teams to make sure that we're coming up with things that are deliverable, that you can put in a production bubble. We don't know quite how long this is going to last, but I'm certainly not getting the impression that people want things that feel smaller or less ambitious. Okay,
great. We've got about 10 minutes to go, about 12 minutes to go until we hit our hour. And so I'm going to move the conversation sort of more future gazing. So we're going to move into that section of the conversation. Now, Ian, this is a question from the floor. And someone would like to know, do you think there is a danger that commissioners will feel the temptation to stick with lower budgets when things return to normal, particularly if they find those shows are rating reasonably well? Would you think that could have a negative impact on the indie community?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, especially if there are shows which cost less than they should, and they start to, studio shows cost a certain amount of money without as a base level, and as soon as you go below a certain level, it just will affect the editorial. So that said, if maybe Snoop Dogg's is the way forward, and if that is I'll be a bit annoyed, Kieran, if that is massively successful, because there would be there would be an anxiety that's what this can work. We can make this amount this, because it is just unsustainable for small businesses. You know, so but that so it's really tricky. I don't think we make anything that is comparable with something like The Jump, but yeah, I think it's well known that the Channel 4 budgets for, say, entertainment shows have come down significantly. I don't think they're unmakeable at that level, but there'll be a different type of show. And actually, since that announcement and since our discussions with Channel 4, they've been really positive, because I think they have encouraged creativity in different ways, rather than that kind of brief, which is kind of quite a familiar one, bring us your biggest, hugest ideas. I think you have to have the lateral thinking in mind when you're thinking of shows which are, okay, here's a certain amount of money, what can you do with that? That's exciting to me. It's just when they come down below a certain level, which compromises the editorial on the idea that you have pitched. And obviously the worst thing in the world is to commit to making a show which can't be made for that price. So I think there's a danger of pitching something hugely ambitious without the budget to support it, and then getting it commissioned.
Kieran, what's your take on it?
Sorry, Kieran, I don't mean to...
No, we've fallen out and we'll never speak again. It's okay. No, I mean, I broadly agree. Like, you know, there are certain shows you can make on a tariff, and even Snoop Dogg's, which is a really simple idea, really simple idea. I don't think it carries over into other shows, is the absolute truth. So, but even at the tariff we're working at, and I think we're delivering. I think when you see it, it doesn't look like we've made it. It's not shot on Zoom calls, and it's not shot on phones, and it looks like a proper TV show. And we've done that by using remote control cameras, PTC cameras, and then the GoPros on the dogs. But Channel 4 know what it took out of us to make that show at that tariff. And, you know, God willing, it's massively successful and it comes back. You have to hope that as we come out of this pandemic, the budgets change somewhat and they become more realistic, because, you know, there's certain shows you can make for a small amount and there's certain shows you just can't. So I hope that when we get to the other end of this, no one says, and that's all the broadcasters, oh, well, you did it for this amount, then you can just keep doing that, because it's not just the amount of money you're making it for, it's everything you have to do to deliver that show during this crisis is, you know, it's tiring, it's hard.
I also think, to Ian's point, I think what we have to hope in entertainment is that they will want to retain those big, ambitious, expensive shows, but hopefully what they'll do is keep them at the tariff that we need to make them, you know, in a way that everybody wants, but probably do less. You know, it may be that Channel 4 would have done one a quarter next year under normal circumstances that were big, risky, very expensive shows, and maybe they'll only try 2 plays next year or 3. But I think it would be great to hang on to the ambition and perhaps try less rather than lose the ambition.
Okay, we've got a comment from the floor actually here from Gwen Hughes, who says, for small indies, it would be impossible if budgets are reduced, particularly when packed. Thinks there will be up to a 30% increase in making shows. The broadcasters need to consider this and not expect indies to take the hit. So that's another voice to the discussion, which seems fair.
Sorry, Jess, just to come in. I mean, look, low-cost shows aren't always necessarily bad business, right? It kind of depends on what the shape of the show is and the volume of the order. But the added complication with the world we're in now is how long it takes to do everything, right? Because then that puts an incremental cost on it. So even at the low-cost end, it's almost like you need to factor in that as a premium. And then you can still make efficient shows. And then the other point about channels and whether they will allow the budgets to stay low, it kind of depends on the channel's business model to a certain degree. But like if you're managing your cash flow as any business and you see that you pay less for something and you get an equivalent return, and if your money is tight, you're going to lean towards doing some of that just to safeguard yourself. The challenge is whether that's going to affect the actual editorial quality, or the promise of the ambition that we'd all like to be able to deliver as program makers.
Fair enough. Okay, we've got 5 minutes to go, so I'm going to ask you guys a relatively broad question, and I'm going to ask you for relatively short answers on it, so apologies. But what are the sort of broader implications of this period, do you think, and I'll start with you, Darren, on pitching and on the shape of business for indies going forward? Do you think, I think everyone sort of broadly accepts that the status quo of work in general probably won't go back to the same structure as it was before, but what do you think broadly will be the implication?
So I think one of the things that is interesting for me is that there are certain, everyone has their own different strategies, right? And some people focus more on the UK, some people focus more internationally. And I guess as a company, we're quite entrepreneurial. But I think even as an entrepreneurial company that's constantly speaking to different types of funders in different types of places, we're trying to speak to as many different people as possible. And I think for us, that's probably just going to increase. We're going to be constantly looking at where are the different places that we can piece something together, and actually, like, territories shouldn't be a hindrance anymore, because we can reach out to people anywhere in the world to try and make something happen. So I suspect we'll probably be more international than we were before as a result of this.
Okay, Mel, what do you think?
I think that the British production sector hasn't really created as many big global international formats as we might have liked over the course of the last few years. I don't think that's because we've lost our creative edge. I think it's because the schedules haven't allowed us to do that. There's just been not a lot of room to try stuff. I think the good thing that will come out of this, for people who are in unscripted certainly, is that the lack of drama is creating opportunity, and I think we're going to see a lot more new formats tried, and I think over the course of the next 18 months we're going to find some hits that are going to travel the world from UK producers.
Good news. Hope so. Ian, agree?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, for us, we are excited about continuing. It sounds so dull, but the we've made efficiencies in terms of the way we have been pitching, and we really thrive on those little bits of intel and insights that you get from commissioners or people like yourself, Jess, and making sure that we're pitching with purpose. When money is tighter, there are less opportunities. So really being laser focused in what our kind of creative muse is, and what we're creating, which I think is exciting, because sometimes it can be a bit nebulous and up in the air. But I think this has really taught us to be sharper, basically, which I'm excited about.
Okay, great. Kieran, same question.
Pretty much agree with everything everyone's saying. I think the pace of our business is changing and hopefully stays the way it is. Indies were always quick to get stuff out the door, and we always lamented the fact that it took so long to hear back from a broadcaster. And I think, exactly what Mel says, these giant gaps in the schedule means that there's big decisions to be made quickly. And the fact that we're doing it all via Zoom and we're not traveling in and out and taking weeks to book in meetings and stuff means that the broadcasters, certainly we're discovering the broadcasters are working much quicker to say yes and no to ideas. And that's great from an indie perspective, because you're not carrying the weight of a maybe for so long.
And I think, just to chip in, that means that as a team, you develop more ideas, because you get the quick kind of no, and you refine and move on and create more ideas and go back. And so, yeah, I think that's a positive. Just more ideas can only be good, right? I mean, that's what I would say.
Well, on that note, we've hit our allotted hour. We have lots of questions that we haven't answered from the floor, so I might try and organise the answering of those questions post recording. Perhaps I might drop a note to the to the panelists and see if they have any responses, and we will definitely post that onto the broadcast website as part of the video package when that goes up. But I have, for now, it is the case that I have to say thank you to our panelists. You've all been brilliant, really insightful. The fact that we've only got through about 30% of what I wanted to shows it's been a good panel, and that there's been lots of really good debate. So, as I say, the recording will be going up online on broadcastnow.co.uk, probably in about 10 days' time, that we expect. But for now, thank you to the guys, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We hope this has been useful. Check back into broadcastnow.co.uk for all the news, analysis and features that we can provide you. But guys, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.